Hello and welcome to Cooking the Books with Heather. Today we're going to be using something we've already made from Vivian Howard's cookbook, This Will Make It Taste Good. And we're going to be making what she calls Meatloaf's Big Makeover. This uses herbaceous, which I will link up here, that we've already made. It's kind of like a pesto, kind of like a chimichurri. It's got garlic confit in it. It's really delicious. It's a good way to save some basil for the rest of the year when it's going to seed. Mine is currently sort of declining for sure because it's gotten a little cool here recently. Anyway, so that's why we made another big batch and we're gonna use that. The very first thing we have to do, well, first we preheated our oven to 325, so that's ready for us. And she says to use a 10 or 12 inch skillet, and we're going to just sweat these onions. She says about 10 minutes over medium heat. We're not looking for color, we're just looking for soft and translucent. So I'm not gonna show you that, that's pretty boring. Just gonna put this pan with a little bit of olive oil in it. I didn't measure this time because it doesn't really matter. Just don't put a ton in. And we're gonna cook the onions and I'll let you know how long they take. Be right back. I also forgot to mention, we're putting a little bit of the salt, not all of the salt for the recipe, but some salt in with those onions while we sweat them. Our onions are basically doing nothing, because it's taking them a while to start to cook. But while the onions are sweating, we're going to be making a sauce for the top of the meatloaf. This is not a ketchup-based sauce, but it is in that vein. So I have all of the ingredients here, and we're going to be making it in the food processor. There we go. So the first ingredient is some sun-dried tomatoes in oil, in extra virgin olive oil. And we're going to just dump all of that in here with the oil and everything. So now we have a jar of roasted red peppers. And I really appreciate, I'm having a hard time opening this. I really appreciate her including the size jars to use. And I also really appreciate that I'm not roasting these peppers myself, because although it's pretty easy, it's just another step and more stuff to get dirty and all of that. So I like this. Finally got it open. We are going to drain this though, thus the strainer. I strained as much of the liquid out as I could, but I'm not too concerned about there being a little bit of liquid in there because we're making a sauce. So now we need some honey, and sadly I've already used my plunger thing that I would use for this, so I'm gonna have to use my tablespoon. So I'm gonna get a small spatula to try to get all the honey out. You can also sort of line it with oil, which helps, but I didn't do that. I could have used it to measure the oil for my pan, but I didn't measure the oil for my pan, so. I think I've done the best I can with getting the honey out of here. So now I need to add some red wine vinegar. There we go. Some more salt from the recipe, but not. Yeah, so we're doing the salt in 3 different things, but the amount is listed all together, but she does at least list the amount in each thing. So now we're just going to blend this until it is smooth. All right, so this is going to be the sauce that we put on top of our meatloaf. So it's a little like ketchup, like a ketchup-based sauce, because there is there are tomatoes, and there's some sugary stuff from the honey, and then there's sour from the vinegar. So then there's the red peppers. That's good. Okay, so that is it for this sauce. It's just blended smooth. Take this, set it over there, set it aside because we don't need to do anything else with this, and I'm gonna put this away. Onions are still cooking, but we're gonna go ahead and get started on mixing up the meat mixture. We're not gonna mix it all up together with the meat until that is done though, because we don't want to overwork the meatloaf. So we're gonna make sort of a base first for our meatloaf of our flavors and all of that before we add the meat. So I've got some eggs used as a binder, keep it from just falling apart. Go. Okay, so we've got our eggs. We've got some sour cream. That's an interesting ingredient that I was not expecting in a meatloaf, but I mean, I often soak my breadcrumbs in milk to provide a little more moisture. Now we have our herbaceous, so I've measured that out, and we're just gonna get it out of here. This is from a second batch that I made. I made a big double batch, which was perfectly fine. And now I'm gonna add some Worcestershire sauce or Worcester sauce, depending on where you're from. There we go. All right, now we're gonna add something else that's chunky, but I'm gonna go ahead and mix this up before we whisk that in because I don't think they will go through the whisk very well. And I wanna get the eggs broken up. All right, there we go. It doesn't matter how much we would whisk this up, honestly, until we add the meat. It's not a problem. And I've got some Kalamata olives that I have roughly chopped. They're pitted and chopped. So I'm just gonna mix those in here. There we go. So now that is ready. When our onions are ready, we can mix it all up. Okay. I'm gonna call these soft and translucent. I don't know how long they've been cooking, but my editor can put that right here. So I'm gonna let them cool just briefly so they're not super hot when I add them to my eggs and beef. But the next thing I need to do is add my ground beef, which this is a lot of ground beef. It's a mixture of two different fat content because I sent my husband to the store and that's what I got. He got a 90-10 and a 97-7, which is kind of lean for what you usually do with meatloaf, but we are adding an awful lot of fat to this with the sour cream and the herbaceous, which has a lot of olive oil in it. So I think it'll be fine. And then I'm going to put the rest of the salt in the recipe. I think that's what she says, just the rest of the salt, not, she doesn't give you, yeah, the remaining, oh, she does give you the measurement here, so that is nice. I'm gonna wash this hand, but I was gonna say, she doesn't tell you what fat percent to get for the ground beef, so it's really up to you. Oh, I was supposed to put the pepper in with the onions, so I'm gonna do that now. All right. Those are still really hot. I also have some breadcrumbs. You could also use crushed saltine crackers, but I have a bunch of breadcrumbs still in my freezer. So I'm just going to use those. I'm gonna go ahead and put these on top. And since everything else is pretty cold, it should be okay. She doesn't say you have to cool these completely or anything before you add them. And I'm not putting them directly into eggs that have nothing else. So this shouldn't scramble eggs. Okay, there's that. I'm gonna start by using a spatula because I just wanna sort of get everything broken up and start to get it mixed together. She does say you wanna treat this with kid hands. You don't want to mix it and squeeze it and all of that because then it will affect the texture. So we're not gonna mash it too much. We're not gonna knead it. We're just gonna try to get it mixed together to where it looks like it's all one texture mostly. So I'm gonna use my hands in just a second. I just wanted to get those onions not so hot that they would burn me. Now that they've been mixed in with everything else, should be okay. All right, so now I'm gonna just try to get it all mixed together so I don't have just pockets of unseasoned ground beef. It seems like a very fine line between overmixing and undermixing here. I don't know. I'm trying to be very gentle with it, but I also don't want huge pockets of, like I said, unseasoned ground beef. All right. Okay, I'm not gonna bother washing my hands, but I am going to make a little more room on my work surface. So I have a baking tray that I have lined with parchment paper. She says you could also use aluminum foil. I like parchment. I'm just going to whack that in here on top. This is a lot of meatloaf. I don't want this to bother you. Here we go. So the goal now is to form this into a loaf approximately 3 inches wide and 3 inches tall and 12 inches long, which seems kind of thin, but I think parchment's turning. There we go. But I think that's good enough. I think that's close. And there we go. That's the loaf of meat. Now look, she says this serves 4 people. I think you're looking at least 6. There's a lot of meat in here, and my family will never be able to eat all this. My family of 4 decently large appetited eaters will not be able to eat all of this. I know that. So we're gonna have leftovers, which is great. I love leftover meatloaf. I really like a leftover meatloaf sandwich. So we'll have to see how this does for that. All right, now I'm gonna wash my hands. Okay, so now we're gonna spread the mixture that we made in our food processor over the top. And we're gonna have to, she says to take care to make sure that you cover the sides. So that's what we're gonna do. This is a lot of sauce. I'm just gonna kind of push this over the edges and make sure it gets all covered. Now, the picture is not of a fully covered meatloaf. She made a nice little design on it, but we all know that pictures and the instructions do not always line up when you are cooking from a cookbook, mostly because sometimes what's pretty is not the best method. So this is going into our preheated 325-degree oven. She says for an hour or until it's cooked all the way through. I think for beef cooked all the way through is 165, but I will check that while this is baking to make sure that we get it fully cooked. You do not want this rare, medium rare, even if you like your burgers that way. That is not how you want to eat this, because it's all been mixed up, and it's if there was any contamination, anything on the outside, it's all throughout. So you want a meatloaf to be done. Anyway, in the oven, I will let you know how long mine takes and show you what it looks like when it comes out of the oven. On this episode of Cooking the Books with Heather, you watched me make Meatloaf's Big Makeover from Vivian Howard's This Will Make It Taste Good. And this was using the previous recipe we made, which was called Herbdacious, which was a little bit like a pesto, a little bit like a chimichurri, at least when I made it with cilantro. I'll link that around here in the description, and it'll be here somewhere, I'm sure, because we used a lot of that in here. I thought the meatloaf was delicious. I really liked the sauce. The sauce was very complimentary. I didn't feel like there was enough sauce to meat ratio. I think I would prefer to more lightly sauce the outside and then maybe reduce the sauce a little bit on the stove and serve it in a puddle of that sauce, because that was great. The sauce was delicious. The meatloaf didn't stick together very well. It was a little crumbly, but that might be because of there were olives in there. I'm not sure. I have a hard time getting meatloaf to keep the texture that I want, where it kind of stays together better, but not super hard and rubbery. I don't know if there's a good midpoint there. There's some place that I know that makes a really good one, but they won't share their recipe. So, it does say that this recipe serves 4 people, but it uses 2.5 pounds of ground beef, and that's way more than we can eat. So we ate it for one dinner and then at least 3 or 4 lunches, and we ate it for a while for our family of 4. So it was way more than 4 people. My husband did end up making a couple meatloaf sandwiches with toasted with cheese, and he thought that was absolutely delicious. He's not a big meatloaf sandwich kind of person. In fact, he's not a ketchup on meatloaf person. He's a gravy with meatloaf person. I grew up as a ketchup with meatloaf family, so I don't make meatloaf a lot because my idea and his idea are very different, and this was more my idea of meatloaf. But he really enjoyed this one, more than I think even he expected. So, and that sandwich was delicious. So it's great to have the leftovers to have the sandwich. So I didn't mind having that much meatloaf. It was actually relatively easy. Had to make the sauce, which, not too bad. And then you just sort of mix everything else up together. You do have to cook the onions, but that's pretty common in a meatloaf because they won't cook enough to be less than crunchy. So cook the onions, and that's it. Really, it's a meatloaf. It's not too hard. And you could make up the sauce the night before, probably make up the meatloaf the night before and just bake it up when you wanted to, if you're in a time crunch. So yeah, so we really enjoyed it. It made an awful lot. Try it on a sandwich. If you enjoyed watching me make this, please give me a thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button and come back and watch me make something else next week.